Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Lamed. Today's daf is sponsored by Batsheva Maslow in honor of her daughter Yakira becoming a bat mitzvah and making her first siyum. I'm so proud of your dedication to learning and the amazing Talmud Hama you are growing into. Today's daf is sponsored by Lisa Kalani in honor of Nancy Kalani's milestone birthday tomorrow. May you keep striving for personal and spiritual growth, reaching new heights, and enriching the lives of all of us around you. Mazal tov to both of you. We are now going to get started with the top of our daf. We saw, and what we're going to deal with in the beginning part of today's daf is the Mishnah discussing what we're supposed to do if we find an item, how we're supposed to handle the item, both what do we have to do to make sure the item doesn't get ruined, and what are we not allowed to do with the item. So there was a very clear directive, which was shotcha litzorka v'lo lechvodo. If you have a piece of cloth, whether it's a clothing or just a piece of cloth, you have to spread it out in order for it to air out every once in a while, but you can't do it for your own sake. Let's say you want to put it as a rug on the floor or a decoration on your couch. You can't do that. So now the Gemara asks a classic Gemara question, what if I want to air it out and at the same time make it look nice in my house because, I have guests coming or something like that? Can I do both at the same time? To get into an answer to this question, we're going to bring three sources, and in the end, we're not going to actually be able to conclude. Because each source, we're going to say, in the end, you can't really learn from there. So tashma, shotcha litzorka. So the first way they're going to learn it is, let's just look at our Mishnah. The Mishnah says you could do it for its own sake, you can spread it out, which would imply litzorka in, ha litzorko, litzorka lo. Sounds like only for its own sake, but if it's for its own sake and for your sake, no. But the Gemara says that's not true, that derivation, because ema seifa, you could derive the exact opposite from the next words. The continuation says, aval lo lichvodo, but not for your sake. So sounds like not exclusively for your sake, right? Lichvodo udelo, but maybe ha litzorka u litzorko shapir dami, but maybe if it's not exclusively for your own sake, but both for your sake and for the sake of that item, shapir dami, maybe it would be fine. So classic you cannot derive it from the words of the Mishnah because the first two words would indicate one way and the next two words would, or the next three words would indicate the other way. So we're left with, definitely can't learn it from there. Second attempt, tashma. Here's a braita that says, lo yishtachena lo agabe mita v'lo agabe magod. You can't put it not over your bed, not on a peg, litzorko, for your own sake. But you could do all those things if you're doing it for the sake of the item. Okay, that didn't help us yet. That just said like our Mishnah. Nizdamnulo orchim. Okay, maybe that's why I gave the example of guests. But if guests are coming, you decide, this would be a great time to air out this item. Lo yishtachenu lo al gabe mita v'lo al gabe magod bein litzorko bein litzorka. If you have guests coming and you want to spread out this nice piece of cloth and you want to put it over your couch, let's say, it doesn't matter whether you're doing it for the sake of the item or whether you're doing it for your own sake. Maybe you're not even trying to do it for your own sake, but even for the sake of the item, you cannot do it. So what do you see here? It sounds like this would be a good example of, even if you're doing it for the sake of the cloth, let's say, time to air it out, and that'll coincide perfectly with when you have guests coming, you're not allowed to do it. And that sounds exactly like our case. Litzorko and litzorka all in one. But the Gemara says that's not the reason. Okay, the reason is not because you're also doing it for your own sake. The reason is a whole different reason, which is shane hatam de mikla kalela. You're basically, quote unquote, burning the item. You're ruining it. What does that mean? By putting it out when guests come, why you're ruining it? Not because it's going to get wear and tear. That's not what we're saying. But imishum ena, imishum ganfe. Ena is an interesting one. What's ena? Way we all say ayin hara. What does it mean, ayin hara? Ayin hara, why is it an evil eye? Because what is ayin hara basically? It's that you have something really nice and people look at you. And when they look at the item, they think they're jealous and they say, why does she have this and I don't? And then that causes perhaps the item to get ruined because once people look at it and start being jealous of you, that could cause, and it's again, this is in the world of superstition, that could cause that item to actually be destroyed. So basically, you're going to take someone else's item, you're going to put it out. People don't know it's someone else's item. They're going to start saying things like, oh, look at that beautiful thing. And it might cause the ayin hara to get to it, so to speak, and it might cause it to get ruined. Okay, that's in the world of superstition. Or mishum ganve. Well, if you put out some really nice item when you have all these guests, there's a chance that your guests might actually try to steal it. I actually had a case of Bava, if you remember, where the guests were in the house and then they stole it while they were in the house. So basically, there's a good reason not to put it out, but that's a totally different reason. It has nothing to do with what we're looking for. Next source, third source, and this is going to be about a totally different topic, egla arufa. And what's nice is we're going to mention para because tomorrow's part, we're going to read Parshat Para. So it's a nice connection here of coincidence of events of this coming out on the week that we're going to read about the para aduma, the red heifer. So what's similar about it, before we even read it inside, there's an egla arufa and a red heifer. Both of those are two totally different situations, but both have a similar laws. The egla arufa is when somebody dies and we have a dead body, not in a city, and we don't know who killed the person. And we basically measure to the closest city, and the rabbis of that city have to come out. They break the neck of a heifer, and then basically we do the ceremony to basically say we're not responsible for the death of this person, to atone. Now the rules are that it has to be an animal shelo ala leha ol, okay, that never had a yoke upon it, that didn't work. It has to be an animal that wasn't worked. Same thing with the red heifer. Same rules apply. It can't be an animal that did work. Okay, so now we're going to have to define what does it mean that you work the animal. And this is going to connect, you'll see, with our topic. Now, this isn't stated in the Gemara, and that's why I'm going to tell you, because at some point we're going to bring in Paraduma to teach us about the Egla Rufa case. Okay, so now, because we do that, why do we do that? Why we can learn one from the other, basically, because both of them use the word ol. That's the main connection between the two. We make a gzera shava. What's true for one is true for the other. The Gemara just assumes you know that, and that's why I'm telling you, because we don't necessarily know that, so they assume that you know that. Tashma. If you put the animal, you took this little animal and this baby, the calf, and you put it in a yoke with its mother, but you did it so that it would nurse, to make it easier for it to nurse, not for it to work. Usually a yoke was put on for working purposes. So, right, it's usually a yoke that connects two animals or 3 or 4 animals together, and often they would do it so that the animals could work together. So you did it for it to nurse. But the animal, while it was in the yoke, the calf threshed with its mother. Kshera, that doesn't count as work, because you did it for what purpose? For its own purpose, for it to nurse. That's very similar to litzor ka, right? For the purpose of the item itself. Even though, again, we're not talking about lost items here, but it's the same concept. Bishvil shetinak vitadush psula. But if you put it there specifically in order to both nurse and thresh, then you cannot use this for your egla arufa. Now, now they're going to say, that's classic, exactly our case. Litzor ko u litzor kahu, vikatane psula. This is a good example where you're doing it for the sake of the animal, but you're also doing it for your own sake, and it says it's no good. Now, again, we're not talking about lost items, but they say here, when they couldn't find a lost item sugya that would prove it, because we tried that and it didn't work, they said, let's try to learn it from somewhere else where this concept exists, and let's apply the same logic, which sounds very good, except the Gemara is going to easily reject this and say, what are you talking about? Shane hatam da'amar kra asher lo ubadba mi kol makom. The pasuk says, you need an animal that was not worked. It doesn't say that you didn't work it. It said that wasn't worked. That's passive. It's a passive verb. So what does it mean? Why is it a passive verb? You work the animal would be a non-passive verb. Then we would think only if you intentionally work the animal. But because it says ubadba, it was worked. It means in any case, meaning even if you did it also for the sake of the animal, but also for your own sake, it will be a problem. Mikomakom includes anything. Now the Gemara is going to say, wait a minute. We saw 2 cases. Both cases, the animal worked. One, you put in the yoke not to work. The other, you put in the yoke, yes, to work, but also to nurse. Well, if you say ubaba means mikomakom in any case, then the first case also If it's all passive, well, the first case was passive and we said it was fine. It's not considered the animal worked. But if this word ubaba is mikomakom in any case, then even the first case. So basically we gave an answer that we learned from the pasuk. But then we say, if we learn it from the pasuk, well, both sides of that Mishnah don't work, right? The first, I think it's a Mishnah. Let me check. But okay, in any case, this source, maybe it's not a Mishnah, maybe it's a braita. Either which way, what do we have here? Our answer doesn't really work because our answer is it's a unique drasha from the pasuk. Asher Baba means in any way it was done. And now they say, well, that doesn't explain the ratio. So something doesn't work with your answer, although don't worry, we're going to resolve it. And we're going to be left with, this source doesn't teach us anything because this is a unique halacha for egla rufa. So they say, and for this, we're going to bring in paraduma. Why do we distinguish between the case where you put it in the yoke just to nurse and the case where you put it in the yoke to nurse and to thresh? Well, halodam ya'elalaha. It's like the following Mishnah in para. Ditznan. Shachan aleha ov. So now again, we're moving to paraduma, which we haven't seen yet. Now we're going to see inside. And we're going to say that, and this is why I said, we're going to learn from egla rufa. We're going to learn from paraduma to egla rufa, but really in the end, it's all going to come from a drasha on egla rufa. And we're going to learn from a Mishnah in para. It's going to explain to us, enlighten us as to what the difference between case 1 and case 2 is in the egla rufa case. But the whole para thing is going to be actually learned from this pasuk, asher lo baba, which is from egla rufa. Shachan aleha of kshera. If a bird flew onto the red heifer, and then the red heifer carried it by walking, walked 2 meters, and on it was a bird. Now you could say that's work. It carried a bird. No, that's not work. Okay, the animal is kshera. The paraduma can be used as a paraduma. Allah aleha zachal. But if a male mounted it to try to impregnate it, psula. That's already it's disqualified. So my timer, what's the reason why this distinction? Because in both cases, the owner didn't do anything active, right? This was all passive. Kidei Rav Papa, da'amar Rav Papa. And now Rav Papa is going to prove this distinction, which is going to be the exact same distinction as by us. And it's all going to be derived from the egla rufa psukim. And that's because, as I told you before, once we learn it for egla rufa, since it says all there, don't put a yoke on it, and it says don't put a yoke on in the paraduma case, we're going to learn from one to the other. So you can look for these psukim tomorrow. Iktiv ubad, ukrinan ubad. What you have to know is, this is a case, when it talks about the egla rufa, it's written ayin bet dalid, which usually would be pronounced as avad, which is an active verb. But it's pronounced, according to our tradition, right? If you look in a Torah, which has the nikudot, the vowels, you look in a chumash, it will be read as ubad, which is a passive verb. So now we're going to say, if it was written ubad with a vav and written and pronounced ubad, bekrinan ubad, havamin afilu mimela. If it was fully passive, written passive and read passive, then I would think totally passive would be a problem. Even let's say the bird flew onto it and it moved, right? Then that would be considered work and it would be disqualified. Ve'iktiv avad, ukrinan avad, and if it was written without a vav and read without a vav, which would be an active verb, havamina ad aviba'iu, I would say only if the owner actually worked the animal. But you can see where this is going. Haj dedictive avad, bekrinan uba, but here we have a mix. It's written as if it was an active verb, but it's pronounced as a passive verb. So, be'inan uba dumia da avad. You need the passive to be like an active. What does that mean? Right? If it's passive, it's not active. Well, ma avad denichale, af uba denichale. When the master works the animal, it's in the master's best interest. Otherwise, it wouldn't do it. So therefore, ubad has to be that it's in the master's interest. So now let's go back to our cases. Let's start with the para aduma, the last case. If the bird flies onto the animal and the animal moves with it, okay, the owner had no interest there. But that was certainly not anything that benefited the owner. So therefore, that doesn't count because it has to be a passive action that the owner actually had interest in. It was good for the owner. Likewise, our case, now it's a little bit different, but they say Yaknisali Riv Kavadasha is like that. You put this animal in the yoke with the mother because you wanted it to nurse, not because you wanted it to thresh. So the fact that it threshed wasn't in your interest at all. Now, in the end, your stuff was threshed. So you have a bit of a question there as to why, if anyway the threshing happened, why we say that's not in your interest. But for some reason, they assume that's not in your interest. But now let's go to case 2 in the paraduma. If Allah has a chal and the male mated with it, that's in your best interest, because to have what things made in order to have offspring, and that's always in the master's best interest to have more offspring. So that's good for the master, just like if you put the animal in the yoke to nurse and to thresh, then it's in your best interest. So those cases are going to be forbidden. What was this all about? We tried to bring this to say, oh, here you see litzar kal, litzar ko is asul. Because look, this is disqualified. To which they say, no, this is a unique drasha from the pasuk. This is not anything that you can learn from to avedot. It just has to do with egla rufa, and the same would be true for paraduma. Moving on. So now we're done. We had 3 attempts to try to get to an answer. We don't actually answer the question. So now the Mishnah had started to say, it said very, very minimally what you do with different vessels, what you can do with them, what you can't do with them. So now the braita, we have a braita that expands on this and goes into more detail about what you can do with different type vessels. If you find wooden vessels, you can use them to the extent so that they don't rot, right? Because you know how wood could rot. You leave it in, especially if it's like a moist place, it'll all get ruined. If you find copper vessels, you can use them even for hot items, but not with fire. Don't put them on the fire because they'll wear away. Clay kesef, silver, you can't even use for hot, only cold, because it tarnishes them. Magrefot v'kardumot, rakes and axes. You can use them to break small things, soft things, but not hard things, okay? Obviously, their tools were not like ours. If we have a hammer or an axe and we hit something hard, nothing's going to happen to the hammer. But theirs must have been made in a way that wasn't as good, and it could actually ruin the implement. Okay, it might make it lessen, okay, it might ruin it. Or wear some of it away, I guess you would say. This we saw in the Mishnah also, gold and glass vessels. Those are very fragile. You cannot touch them until Eliyahu comes. And just like Aveda, also if somebody gives you their items to watch, the same is true. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? If someone gives you something to watch, you're not allowed to take it out and do anything with it. No way, no how. To which they answer, no, and now we learned something interesting about a pikadon. If you give me something to watch, let's go back to our beged that needs to be aired out every once in a while. Or let's say a kli eitz that it will rot. So if you're in town, then we assume you're the one who's going to come every once in a while, take it out and do what's needed. But if you go out of town, then it's my responsibility. And while I'm watching your item, I actually, even though I'm not allowed to use your item, I do take it out and use it in order for its own sake. Okay, now we're going to move to a totally different topic, which was the last line of the Mishnah, which I said, because it was so different from the rest of the Mishnah, I said, we'll deal with it when we get to the Gemara. If you find a bag or a box or something that you wouldn't normally pick up, because it's humiliating to walk around carrying a sack over your shoulder or something like that in the public domain, let's say you find that embarrassing, then you don't actually have to pick it up if you find it as a lost item on the street. This is going to be, or we're going to have to figure out later, how do we determine what you would and what you wouldn't? Like, how do we know that? So let's start first with Menahane Mile. Where do we get that there's exemptions? Now here we're going to actually bring a braita that talks about different exemptions. One of them is a little similar to this, but it actually doesn't say what it says in the Mishnah here. Tana Rabbanan, v'hitalamta. So let's read the pasuk first. Lo tireh, we're in Dvarim chapter 22, verse 1. Lo tireh et shor achicha o et seyoni dachim. Don't see the shore of your brother or the seh wandering. Vihit alamta mehem. Okay, it's very weird language. Don't see your friends or your brother's animal wandering and ignore it. That's weird. Just say, right, don't ignore your friend's animal if you see it wandering. So this actually says, if you read it, it says, don't see your friends this and ignore it. To which the braita says, oh, it says ignore it. So that must mean this must be referencing the fact, again, it's written in this weird language to tell you that there are some times where you can actually ignore it, even though obviously the pasuk is saying you can't ignore it, but the world of drasha says, oh, this is including that there are some cases where you can ignore it. What would they be? Haketzad? Haya kohen v'hi bebeit hakvarot. A kohen sees something. A kohen can't go into a cemetery. And Cohen walks by the cemetery, outside the cemetery, and sees this lost item in the cemetery. He can't go in. Or it was an elderly person, and it's not within their dignity to do this kind of thing. Okay, which from here you could get to our case as well, that if it's not any person according to their dignity, okay, if it's not dignified for you to carry a sack in the public domain, let's say you're the king and you find something, right? It's not appropriate for you to carry a sack over your back in public, so you wouldn't do. Case number 3, you make so much money per hour or per minute that, and the aveda is not so expensive, that it's the aveda, the lost item, is less money than the amount that you're going to lose by picking up this item. You don't have to do. You don't have to take a huge financial hit in order to pick up the item. In the next Mishnah, we'll get into, do you get paid for picking up a lost item? Okay, now, so the braita finishes, in order to teach you these 3 exemptions, that's why it says v'talam tamehem. So now the Gemara says, why do you need a pasuk to learn most of these things, or to which one is really the pasuk coming? Because a bunch of these we actually can learn from other places. For what do you need this pasuk for? We have a mitzvah aseh hashev tishimei, return the lost item. But a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment, is not strong enough to override both a positive and a negative commandment. And when it comes to the kohen going into the cemetery, there's both a negative commandment not to do it. Rashi helps us out here. Lenefesh lo yitama, do not become impure to a dead person and a dead body. And it also says in the psukim there, okay, pasuk vav of chapter 21 of Vayikra, kiddushim yihiyu. Okay, the kohanim have a commandment to be sanctified. What does it mean to be sanctified? Not to go into a cemetery. So there's both a positive and a negative. Now, a positive commandment is not strong enough to override a positive and a negative commandment. Positive commandment could override a negative commandment, like, for example, doing a Brit Milah on Shabbat. But it can override a positive and a negative. So, right, v'lo ate aseh v'doche lo taseh v'aseh, and that just doesn't happen, okay? One positive commandment can't override a positive and a negative. So we don't need a pasuk for that. And all the more so we don't need a pasuk for a second reason. We would never override an isser, something that's forbidden in the world of isser v'heter, in order for dine mamono, for some financial thing. Just because someone's going to lose their money, we don't say, oh, you can go do transgress a negative commandment in the Torah that has to do with the world of Isurim, like a kohen going into a cemetery. So there would be no way we would override this for that. Okay. Ella, l'shalom merubah mishal chavero. What if your salary was greater than the amount, the salary loss you were going to take by getting this lost item was greater than your friend's lost item? Well, that we will learn Rabbi Yehuda. We come from here. One could question whether it really comes from here. And there's also, I looked for halachic, usually on a statement like this, we'd have a little letter which would tell us, go look at the Amish Patner Mitzvah. It would tell you where you find the halacha. There is no letter here. So I wonder really what the relevance of this halacha is. But Rav Huna Marav Nafka, the Amar, in other words, it already comes from his statement. The Amar of Yehuda Marav, turning out to Amabet, Efes kilo yebechav yon. Okay, this is a pasuk. Okay, it's in Dvarim Tevav pasuk Dalid. Efes kilo yebechav yon ki barach Hashem Elokecha. Ba'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha nachala l'rishtas. You will not have poor people among you. God is making a promise. Okay. Now, you will have poor people. What exactly this pasuk means, you can go look it up. But what are they going to say here? The word efes is extra, and they learn from this, sholcha kodem l'shel kol adam. You have to worry about yourself before you worry about other people. So in other words, now, even though it's tricky because poor people do have to give charity, but you have to make sure not to give charity in a way that's going to make you poor. Now, that's a big jump from there to if you make a lot of money, don't stop what you're doing in order to help, right, in order to return someone's lost item, which is not worth as much. But they somehow loosely connect, they're somehow loosely connected, you could say. It's basically saying, don't make yourself take a loss, right? Take care of yourself first before you take care of other people. Obviously, again, that's why I said what the ramifications are la halacha, because we do say that you should, give charity, even if it maybe is going to make you struggle a little bit. So you have to figure that out. Anyway, I'm leaving it as an open question right now. But basically, they think that you can derive that halacha from Rav Yehuda's statement and in the name of Rav. So therefore, they say in the end, the pasuk must be coming for this elderly person. And for someone who's an elderly person, or perhaps maybe it even means a Talmid Chacham, another thing that's not so clear from our sugya. Is it a Talmid Chacham and it's not respectful for the Talmid Chacham to do it, then they don't have to take the lost item. Amar Rabba. So now Rabba says, well, hikisha, even if you're exempt, if you prod the animal, like let's say you take a stick and throw it at the animal to get the animal moving. Now, there's a big debate among the commentaries. Are you getting it to move in the direction of the person who lost it? Or you, like, let's say you saw the person leave it behind and then you prod the animal forward to go toward the person? Or are you prodding it in the opposite direction? It's a good question. Let's go with you're prodding it toward the person who lost the item. Then chayav ba. So if you're, let's say, a zaken, and it's not lefi chvodcha to do this, okay? It's not something you would normally do. It's not respectful for you. If you started, okay, and some people say this is based on this concept of hamatchil mitzvah, omrim lo gemor. If you start doing a mitzvah, well, then you have to finish it. So maybe you were exempt, but since you started doing an action as if fulfilling the mitzvah, you have to finish it. So if prodding the animal didn't get the animal to get all the way to its owner, then you have to go return it. And in fact, we're going to see a story, which to me seems like this is proving zaken means not just elderly, but also Talmid Chacham, because the story with Abai and Rabba, if you remember, was a generation above. He adopted Abai. I said it wrong. Rabba adopted Abai, and which means that Abai here is going to be the zaken, but it seems that it's really he's a Talmid Chacham, because I assume if Rabba was still alive, Abai wasn't that old yet. So Abai have a yativ kameh de Rabba. He was sitting before Rabba. He found these goats that were wandering. So he took a clod of dirt and earth and he threw it at him, at a clod of soil, and threw it at the animals. Amar lahu behu kuma hadrinu. And Rabbi said, you just obligated yourself. Get up and go return them. Now we have a question. Okay, now this is really going back to our Mishnah, because as I said, those three exceptions didn't really include the case in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said any person who it's beneath your dignity to pick up this item, you don't have to return it. So comes again another classic question, like we started with today. What if it's an item that in the field you wouldn't have a problem because there's not a lot of people there? So what you'll do in the field, you won't necessarily do in the city when there's a lot of people. So you're happy to carry the sack over your back in the field, but you're not happy to do it in the city. And you wouldn't do it in a city. So what's the situation? Do we say that you need to have a complete return, meaning in order to be obligated, it has to be a complete obligation, meaning an obligation everywhere. So since it's not your way to return it in the city, therefore you don't have to return it even in the field. Or do we say no? Since you have an obligation in the field, and then maybe you say the reverse. Once you're obligated in the field, well, maybe that means then, okay, then you're obligated to return this item no matter where you find it. And Teku, we don't know the answer. So you can see how this could go both ways. Amar Rava. So Rava says, if you would return your own item, then you also return your friend's item, meaning here's our litmus test. How do we know if this is beneath your dignity? Well, if your item was found like that in the street, would you pick it up? Or would you not? Would you just say, oh, I'll leave it because it's beneath my dignity to pick this up right now? Okay, we're now comparing Dina Aveda to Prikantina, which is, if you remember, right, if the animal, someone's animal, the load the animal is carrying starts to fall off, right, you can help pick it up, or taking it off when it's, right, hard to take off, so you have to help someone to take off, if they're carrying something, either their animal or even themselves. So Prikantina is a mitzvah. We're going to see an example right now. If you would do it for your own thing, then then you also have to do it for your friend. But let's say you have a terrible back and you wouldn't do it for your own stuff, so then you don't have to do it for your friend's stuff. Here we're going to have a story, Rabbi Shmot, and then we're going to have two questions on the story, which is going to the second question is going to take us a little bit into a different sugya. Rabbi Yishmael but Rabbi Yossi have a kazel ba'orcha. He was walking on a path, and it's an interesting story with the way things come about, the way things, the word I can't think about, lehit galgel, the way things, you'll see. There's an interesting twist in the story. So he was walking, and he sees this guy. So he was carrying a bundle of wood. So he took it off of him and he went to rest. And then the guy says, after he rested, he said, help me put it back on my shoulder. So that's Ti'ina. Amarle, now. So theoretically, it sounds like Rabbi Yossi was obligated to help him put it on. But Amarle, instead of, okay, this is where the story unfolds in an interesting manner. He says, Amarle kama shavim. Instead of helping him pick it up, he says to the guy, what's this bundle worth? Amarle palga de zuz. Seems like a disconnected question. He says it's worth half a zuz. Yavle palga de zuz. So Rabbi Yossi didn't want to pick it up and help the guy. So he said, I'll pay you for them. And then I won't be obligated because they won't be yours anymore. So he pays him a half a zuz. Ve'afkara. But then he immediately says, I don't want this bundle of wood. First of all, he didn't want to help the other guy. He certainly doesn't want to carry it himself. So he makes it hefker, makes it ownerless because he didn't really want it. He just bought it to make it ownerless. Well, what'd the guy do? The guy whose bundle it was, Hadar Zachabahu. So he said, oh, great. That was ownerless. Great. I'm taking it because it was his anyway. So he took it. And now what happens? Well, we're going to go back and have the same cycle. Because at this point now, he wants help to put it back on his shoulder. And Rabbi Yossi is now obligated to help him put it on his shoulder. So, Hadar Yavle Palga Dezuze Va'afkara. Rabbi Yossi does the same thing. He gives him another half zuz. This guy is obviously going to make a lot of money on this deal. He gives him another half a zuz and then makes it hefker. But obviously, what's going to happen now? Chazye to have a kabaya lemehadar lemizkebehu. But he saw that the guy, right, whether he saw it, this sounds like he realized this was going to keep happening. So, what does he do? I'm going to make this owner list for everybody else in the world, but not for you. You might remember we had cases like this where a husband says to his wife, you're muteret l'chol adam, but not to this person, right? And it was a question, is it a valid get or not? Now that's a whole different story because that's the world of get, but it's like the same kind of idea, which is I'm going to make this owner list for you, for everyone, but not for you, so that you cannot reacquire this item and put me in the same obligation over and over. I want this to end. So now we're going to have two questions. Number one, are you allowed to be mafkir something in that way? What does it mean to make something ownerless? Can you actually do that partially? It says in the Mishna, Beit Shammai omrim, hefker laniyim hefker. Beit Shammai says you can. If you make something ownerless, specifically for poor people, which means you could do it for any category of people, you can make something ownerless for poor people and not for anyone else. But Beit Hillel omrim eino hefker, ad she hefker laniyim ulashirim keshmita. In order for a hefker to work, you have to make it ownerless to everybody, rich, poor, all equal, just like Shemitah. Shemitah produces. Hefker is ownerless to everybody. It's available to everyone. So therefore, if you're going to make something hefker, it has to be to everyone. So how did he do this? So Ella, Rabbi Shmot, Rabbi Yossi, the Kulei Am Afkarinu. Really? It was ownerless to everyone. He just said it. It wasn't true. But he was hoping that by saying it, it would prevent the person from actually acquiring it, okay? Halachically, there was no validity to what he was saying. It was a meaningless statement. But he was hoping it would be effective in terms of the guy wouldn't then say, oh, this is mine again. Okay, question two. So we dealt with that. Question two, Rabbi Yossi, Zaken ve'no lefi chvodo hava, but he was a Zaken, again, whether he was old or whether it was Tamid Chacham, for sure he was that. And it's not respectful for him. So he wasn't even obligated. To which they say, Rabbi Yossi lifnim mishurat hadin hu David. He went beyond the letter of the law. In other words, he could have just ignored this person and said, I'm not obligated, and didn't have to help him at all. But he felt bad doing that. He wanted to do, or not he felt bad, but he wanted to do beyond the letter of the law. And therefore, he paid for it. Okay? And that's lifnim mishurat hadin. And I mentioned yesterday, the Alana Stein-Hain has a shiur this week on Beyond the Daf and Din and Daf about specifically this issue of lifnim mishurat hadin. Very interesting topic, and we're going to talk about it now. The Gemara is going to go more in depth into lifnim mishurat hadin. just to remind you, all the shiurim, the extra shiurim now are available also on a podcast called Beyond the Daf, or you can get them on our website and also on YouTube. Okay, now, the question is, right, Tani Rav Yosef, how do we know we have this concept of Lifnim Shurat Hadin? As it says, V'hodata lahem, we saw this at the end of Bava Kama. Okay, this is a pasuk of Yitro. Yitro, and if you remember, he advises Moshe on his judges and all that. And when he's describing to him the system he should set up, he says, you should teach the people the laws, and you should show them the way they should go, right, the path they should take him, and the actions that they should take. So we're going to now darshan the second part of that pasuk and all the different words about what Moshe is supposed to be teaching them. People say that, Rashi says that is teaching them a trade. People should have jobs, should work, okay? Appropriate for the news of the day, with the chok hagiyus and all that, and the yeshivas. Okay, et haderech zog gmilut chasadim. The derech is to do gmilut chesed. Okay, we call it gmilut chasadim, right? That's doing good things for other people. Yelchu ze bikor cholim. I assume we're going to ask, is it bikor cholim part of gmilut chasadim? Likewise with the next one. Okay, but this is visiting the sick, right? Because you go there. Ba zokfura, right? Yelchu ba. Ba means to bury them, bury people. Et hamaseh zehadin. And then you have to teach them the laws. Asher yasun zo lifnim shurat hadin, right? It could have just said et hadin. Why do they have to do, right, et hamaseh? You just said, teach them the maseh. What is asher yasun? That not only do you have to do law, you have to also go beyond the letter of the law. So now let's go through this. Amar Mar. What do you mean? Isn't that under the category of Gemilu Chesed? There's a bit of a weird thing. We saw this term bengilo yesterday, which either means someone the same age or means someone the same age and born in the same constellation. We said yesterday that perhaps they have the same moles, which was a little bit weird. Also here, we're going to see something a little bit strange. They had all these beliefs about things. Someone born in the same astrological sign as you, or maybe just the same age as you, like one of your colleagues, when they go to visit you and you're sick, they will take 1/60th of the disease with them. In other words, right, it almost sounds like it's contagious, but it's only contagious to people who, right, who are the same age or constellation as you. Okay, so this is a bit of a strange thing, but what they're trying to say is, Gemilut Chesed, usually it doesn't make it worse for you, but this is something that could make it worse for you because you could get some of the disease, but you still have an obligation to do it, right? Afilu hachi, even so, you still have to go visit them. Ba zokfura, hainu gemilut chasadim, same thing. Isn't burying people also part of gemilut chesed? Lo nitzracha ela lezaken ve'eno lefi chodo. What this is coming to teach you, if you're an elderly person and it's not lefi chodcha to do chesed, so you don't have to. But burial, you have to do anyway. That's how important it is. Asher yasun zo lifnim shurat hadin. And now we're going to have a very interesting statement about lifnim shurat hadin. So the Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lo chava Yerushalayim ela al shadanu ba din Torah. So Rabbi Yochanan makes this very strange statement. The reason for the destruction of the temple was that they did din Torah. Okay, that's very weird, right? Ela dine de megizta l'daino. What they should have done? Some people say megizta is the magistrate. Okay, you can even see that's the same letters, right? Megizta, magistrate. What they should have judged by the magistrate that was in charge then, that would have been better. Had they not done din Torah, they did the rule of of whoever was in charge. Ela ema, what it means is, fascinating line, she'emidu dinehem al din Torah v'lo avdu lifnim mishurat hadin. Now we always think of lifnim. Okay, so let me just translate this. What was the reason for the destruction of the temple? They ruled by the strict law, and they didn't rule beyond the letter of the law. Now this is strange because you're not supposed to rule beyond the letter of the law. So, right, this seems to be, this sugya, and there's different sugyot about lifnim mishurat hadin. This sugya seems to be indicating that lifnim mishurat hadin is actually part of the legal system, right? In other words, within the legal system, there's times when you have to go beyond the letter of the law, right? We always think it's, someone just decides, oh, I'll do this. I'm not really obligated. I'll do it anyway. This seems to be saying that even within the law, sometimes we should rule even beyond the letter of the law, or people should not just take what the law says, but people themselves should go beyond the letter of the law. And it's a very interesting topic. Like I said, you should listen to Alana Steinhain's Shiur. Okay, new Mishna. Ezu hi avedah. What is considered an avedah? Which is not really the question, and the Gemara is going to ask, What do you mean, what is an Aveda? Didn't we just have a list of all these things that are Avedot? That was the whole beginning of the Mishnah, right? This is an Aveda, this is a lost item, you can take it, you cannot take it. So they're going to say what? Only these things are Avedot, not everything else that we've been discussing. But what it really means is, when you see an item, how do you know that it's lost from the owner? And particularly if they're going to talk about animals. You see an animal wandering. Animals wander often, right? They wander and then they go back. So how do you know they're lost or not, right? Kids, right? They walk away from their house and then they come back. They know where to go. Dogs, right? They wander around, they come back. How do you know when someone is lost? Okay. Now, we're not talking about a person. A kid can say, oh, I can't find my mom. I'm stuck. But an animal can't tell you, and we don't know. We see it wandering around. Is it lost or is it just going to wander back home? So, you see a donkey or a cow wandering around on the path. That's not an aveda. That's normal. But you see a chamor v'kelav hapuchim. You see a donkey and the saddle is upside down. Or para ratza ben hakramim, where you see a cow running in the vineyards. Okay, which number one, running is not typical. And number two, it's in the vineyard, which means like they could get caught up on all sorts of things. They could get, on the vines and trip, and it's not a typical place, and it's likely they're lost. Harezo aveda. Gemara is going to get into all sorts of details about this tomorrow. Okay, next halacha. And this is going to get us, there's double language here, hashev tishibim, which comes to say you have to do it multiple times. So if every time you return the animal, and then the animal gets lost again, right? Your neighbor's dog wanders away all the time, gets lost. You have to keep returning it every time you see it. You can't just say, okay, I've done this twice, I'm done. We learned that from hashev tishibim, the double language. From here, we're going to get off on a big tangent about double language use in all sorts of other cases. Bahaya batel misela. Now we get to the salary. You basically, instead of making your sela of money, you went and returned this lost item. Lo yomar lo ten li sela. You can't say, give me back a sela. Ela noten lo scharo kepoel. But he gives you your money, your salary like a worker. Okay, we don't know what this means. The Gemara is going to have to explain this. We'll get to that tomorrow. Im yesh sham beit din, but if there was a court there and you say, listen, I'm not willing to take this lost item unless I got my salary back, matzneh b'fnei beit din, you could make this declaration in front of the court, and then you will get your salary back. Im ein sham beit din b'fnei mi yatzneh shelo kodem. So im ein sham beit din b'fnei mi yatzneh, if you don't have a beit din in front of who you can do this, shelo kodem, you can basically decide you're not going to return it. It's not worth the loss for you. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to ask the question. I already told you it will ask. Atu kolhane. What everything we mentioned to Tony, that wasn't Aveda that we say, what is a lost item? But this is not our list of our comprehensive list of lost items. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Hachikamar, what it meant is not what is an Aveda, which is the literal translation of Ezohi Aveda. Ezohi Klal Aveda. What are the general rules? What's the litmus test for Aveda Shu Chayavba, for an Aveda that you have to take and return? In other words, again, how do you know? How can you define if this item is lost or not? And that's going to depend on how you found the animal. Amar Rav Yehuda, okay, so sorry. Matzah chamor para ruim baderech, ein zo aveda v'lo mechayev ba. See them on the road, that's not an aveda, and you're not responsible to, right? You're actually supposed to just leave it because it's not even a lost item. Chamor v'kelav avchim para ratza ben akramim. This is just repeating the mission now with our interpretation. Harezo aveda mechayev ba. Then you would be obligated. Last question for today. Ula olam. If you see a chamor or para on the path, okay, what? You see it every day for a month. It's not lost, right? You never see the owner with it. Seems weird. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav ad shlosha yamim. Says 3 days. After 3 days, you have to return it. To which the Gemara asks, Hechidami, what exactly is the case? Ibelavata, if you see it at nighttime, afilu chadashata, you assume animals don't wander at night. Even after 1 hour, you have to return it, which really might even mean 1 minute, right? The first minute you see it, you have to return it. And if it's during the day, maybe, yeah, every day the person lets their animals graze. They go out, they come back, right? You see dogs on the street wandering, right? Every day they're there. It doesn't mean they're lost. So you see them very early in the morning and very late at night, which is already atypical timing, but not totally atypical. So the first 3 days, you assume it maybe is just there. It went out a little earlier. It stayed out a little later. But tfei, more than that, vaday avedi. After that, you can assume that it's definitely an avedi. With that, we'll finish for today. So review our das. We started with litzorko, litzorka. We had three sources to try to prove. We couldn't prove what we do. We brought all the klei kesef and all the different kelim and what you could do with them. We brought a braita that expanded on the Mishnah. Then we got to this, all the exemptions of when you don't have to return items. We had the three exemptions in the braita plus the exemption in our Mishnah, that if it's just not respectful for you to do this, which how do we determine that? Based on, right, what you would do with your own stuff. Would you take it if it was yours? If not, then you don't have to take it for other people. And then we talked about we had the story of Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, and then we had two questions on him, which we got into Lifnei Mishurat Adin. And then we got to how do we determine if an item is lost when you see an animal wandering? Okay, how do you know if it's lost or if the owner knows and it's just wandering and will come back home? With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shnishma B'Sorot Tovot.